An immigrant shared his meal with a hungry child, unaware the boy would grow up to be a surgeon. The memory of that moment had faded like autumn leaves, scattered by time's relentless wind. But fate has a way of bringing life full circle when we least expect it. Armin Nazarian clutched his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders as the November wind cut through the worn fabric. 7 months in America, and still the Boston cold felt foreign against his skin. Nothing like the dry winters of his Armenian hometown. His calloused fingers, still stained with kitchen grease despite vigorous scrubbing, trembled slightly as he unwrapped the small bundle containing his dinner. Leftover lamb kebab with rice that the restaurant owner had allowed him to take home after his 12-hour shift washing dishes. The public park bench wasn't ideal, but his one-room apartment in the immigrant quarter had grown suffocating tonight. The walls seemed to close in with each passing day, covered in unpaid bills and faded photographs of the family he'd left behind. Outside, at least, the vast American sky reminded him that possibility still existed somewhere beyond his exhaustion. Steam rose from the food container, a small ghost disappearing into the twilight. Armand closed his eyes, inhaling the familiar spices, the one constant that connected his past to this uncertain present. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since the dry toast and coffee he'd managed at dawn. That's when he noticed the boy, 10, perhaps 11 years old, with a mop of dark hair and eyes that seemed too serious for his small face. The child stood 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree, watching Armin with an unnerving stillness. Their eyes met briefly before the boy looked away, but not before Armin caught the unmistakable hollow gaze of hunger. Armand recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror too often during his first months in America, when work was scarce and his English too broken to navigate the complex system of assistance. He'd seen it in his village after the conflict that had eventually driven him from his homeland, searching for something better across an ocean. "Home. Hey," Armin called out, his accent thick but his tone gentle. "You hungry?" The boy didn't move, suspicion evident in the slight tensing of his shoulders. Armin lifted the container slightly. "Is good food?" "Sure, come." For a moment, Armin thought the boy might run, but hunger proved stronger than caution. With slow, hesitant steps, the child approached, stopping a careful distance from the bench. "Sit!" Armin patted the empty space beside him. "What is your name?" "Michael," the boy answered, his voice barely audible above the rustle of autumn leaves. "I am Armin." He divided the food carefully, using the plastic fork to separate the lamb and rice into 2 portions. "Here, eat." Michael stared at the offered food, uncertainty flickering across his face. "My mom says not to take things from strangers." Armin nodded solemnly. "Your mother is wise, woman. But tonight we are not strangers. We are a tintum." He paused, searching for the right English word. "Neighbors. Under same sky." Something in those simple words seemed to reassure the boy. He took the container with both hands, his fingers red from the cold. The first bite disappeared quickly, followed by another. Armin smiled slightly, turning to his own diminished portion. They ate in silence as dusk deepened around them. 2 solitary figures finding momentary communion in shared hunger and its satisfaction. When Michael finished, he stared at the empty container as if willing more food to appear. "Where is your home?" Armin asked carefully, noting the boy's worn sneakers and jacket too thin for the season. Michael pointed vaguely toward the east side of the park. "Mom's working late again. I'm supposed to be at Mrs. Finley's, but she smells like cabbage and her TV only gets 2 channels." Armin chuckled despite himself. "So you escape?" A small, conspiratorial smile crept across Michael's face, the first real expression Armin had seen. "Yeah, but I got hungry." Something tightened in Armin's chest, a familiar ache that had nothing to do with his own empty stomach. Back home, he had nieces and nephews he might never see grow up. In their faces, he'd seen the same resilience this American boy displayed. Children adapting to a world that often forgot their hunger, both physical and otherwise. "Wait," Armand said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a slightly squashed baklava, wrapped in wax paper, another gift from his sympathetic employer. "Dessert." The boy's eyes widened at the honey-soaked pastry, layered with pistachios and phyllo dough. Armin broke it in half, offering the larger portion. "Careful, it's sticky." As Michael took his first tentative bite, his expression transformed. Wonder replaced wariness, and for a brief moment, he was simply a child experiencing something delicious, not a hungry boy in a cold park. "So, what is this?" he asked between sticky mouthfuls. "Baklava, from my country." "Where's that?" Armenia. Very far away. Armin gestured vaguely eastward. Beyond ocean. Michael considered this, licking honey from his fingers. Why'd you come here? The question caught Armin off guard. Even adults rarely ask so directly. Most seemed content with their assumptions about immigrants, that they came for opportunities, for wealth, for the American dream. Few understood the complex tapestry of loss, hope, and necessity that pushed people from their homelands. For life, Armin said finally, finding simplicity where complexity lived. New start. Michael nodded as if this made perfect sense. My mom says we're getting a new start too, after my dad left. The straightforward way the boy delivered this piece of personal history touched Armin deeply. Children possessed a remarkable ability to distill complicated adult situations into their essential truths. New starts are good, Armin offered carefully. Hard but good. Distant church bells chimed 7 times. Michael jumped up suddenly, alarm replacing the momentary contentment on his face. I gotta go. Mrs. Finley will tell my mom I wasn't there. Armin nodded, understanding the universal fear of parental disapproval. Go quick. The boy took 2 steps, then turned back, hesitating. Thanks for the food, mister. Then, with awkward formality that suggested recent lessons in manners, it was very nice to meet you. Same, Michael. Armin smiled, lifting his hand in a small wave. Maybe we meet again sometime. But Michael was already running, a small shadow darting between trees, leaving Armin alone once more on his bench under the darkening sky. He gathered the empty containers, suddenly aware of his own lingering hunger. He'd given away more than half his meal, yet somehow he felt fuller than before. As he stood to leave, Armin noticed something on the bench. A small pocket knife with a red plastic handle, worn from use. The boy must have accidentally left it behind in his hurry. Armin picked it up, intending to call out, but Michael had already disappeared beyond the park's iron gates. He turned the knife over in his palm, considering. Perhaps they would indeed meet again, and he could return it. For now, he pocketed the small object and began the long walk back to his apartment, unaware that this brief encounter would echo across decades in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. 17 years passed. Dr. Serverdi. Michael Chen adjusted the final settings on the surgical imaging system, his movements precise and economical. At 33, he had already established himself as one of Boston General's most promising cardiothoracic surgeons, known for taking on high-risk cases that other doctors sometimes deemed hopeless. BP's stable at 130/85, the anesthesiologist reported. Patients prepped and ready, Dr. Chen. Michael nodded, his focus narrowing to the task ahead. A complicated triple bypass on a 68-year-old male with extensive arterial damage. The patient had been transferred from a community hospital after suffering a major heart attack 3 days prior. According to the file, he had no family contacts listed. Just another solitary life in a city full of them. Let's begin, Michael said, his voice calm and steady beneath his surgical mask. The operating room hummed with focused energy as nurses and assistants moved with choreographed efficiency around the unconscious patient. As he made the initial incision, Michael felt the familiar sense of purpose that had driven him since medical school. Each surgery was a story, a narrative of damage and repair, of systems failing and being restored through human intervention. This particular story had begun decades earlier in the patient's body, with plaque building silently in coronary arteries, a slow catastrophe waiting to unfold. 2 hours into the procedure, Michael encountered unexpected complications. The patient's heart tissue was more fragile than the scans had indicated, making the grafting process extraordinarily delicate. More suction here, he instructed calmly, despite the rising tension. And can we get another clamp? The tissue's tearing at the primary attachment point. As his team responded to his requests, Michael maintained absolute concentration. This was why he had become a surgeon. These critical moments where skill, knowledge, and intuition converged, where lives balanced on the edge of his scalpel. Heart rates dropping. The anesthesiologist warned. I see it, Michael replied, his hands never faltering despite the urgency. Let's administer 0.5 milligrams of epinephrine and prepare for internal defibrillation if necessary. For the next 45 minutes, Michael worked with meticulous precision, navigating complications that would have overwhelmed less experienced surgeons. Gradually, the patient stabilized. The bypass grafts took hold. The damaged heart, so close to failure, began to find its rhythm again. When Michael finally stepped back from the operating table, almost 5 hours after the first incision, exhaustion washed over him. But beneath the fatigue was satisfaction, They had pulled the patient back from the edge. "Good work, everyone," he said, stripping off his gloves. "Doctor Rodriguez, would you close? I'll check on him in recovery later." In the doctor's lounge, Michael collapsed into a chair, allowing himself a moment of stillness after the intense focus of surgery. He pulled off his surgical cap, running a hand through his dark hair, now damp with sweat. These were the surgeries that reminded him why he'd chosen this path, the ones where every millisecond of his training mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, his fiancée. "Dinner tonight? Mom's asking about wedding plans again." He smiled tiredly, typing back, "Surgery ran long. Meeting her tomorrow might be better. Love you." Dr. Eliza Washington, the chief of cardiology, entered the lounge and poured herself coffee. "Heard you performed another miracle, Chen." Michael shook his head. "Just doing my job. Patient's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while." "That's the third high-risk case you've taken on this month," she observed, stirring cream into her coffee. "The heart transplant committee's meeting next week, by the way. We're still looking for another member with your expertise." The invitation was clear. Michael had been avoiding additional administrative responsibilities, preferring to focus on his surgical practice. But he knew his career advancement would eventually require it. "I'll think about it," he promised. "Do that," Eliza smiled. "Oh, and your bypass patient from today. There's something you should know. His name flagged in our system. He was part of a research study on immigrant health outcomes about 15 years ago. Dr. Sranyudvashivaru. Patel remembered him specifically because he refused additional treatment at the time. Said he couldn't afford to miss work. Typical. Michael sighed. What's his background? Armenian. Came here in the early 2000s. Been working in restaurants ever since. No insurance until recently when he qualified for Medicare. She handed him the patient file. Name's Armin Nazarian. Something flickered in Michael's memory. A half-forgotten fragment, like a dream partially remembered upon waking. He took the file, studying the name. Nazarian, he repeated slowly. I should check on him. In the recovery room, monitors beeped steadily beside the patient's bed. Armin Nazarian lay still, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, assisted by the ventilator. His face was weathered, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, the topography of a difficult life. Gray peppered his dark hair and beard, and his hands, resting above the blanket, showed the calluses and small burns of decades in restaurant kitchens. Michael checked the monitors, satisfied with the readings. The immediate danger had passed. Recovery would be long, but barring complications, Armin would live. As he made notes in the patient chart, Michael's eyes caught on a small plastic container on the bedside table, labeled Patient Belongings. Through the clear plastic, he could see a wallet, a worn key ring, and something red and familiar, a pocket knife with a plastic handle. Michael froze, his pen hovering above the chart. The memory surfaced completely now. A cold park bench, the smell of spiced lamb, sticky baklava on his fingers. A kind man with a thick accent who had shared his dinner with a hungry boy. The pocket knife, his prized possession at age 10, accidentally left behind when he ran back to his babysitter's apartment. It can't be, he whispered. He set down the chart and carefully opened the container, removing the red pocket knife. Turning it over in his palm, he found what he knew would be there. His childish carving of his initials, MC, barely visible after years of use. Michael sank into the chair beside the bed, staring at the unconscious man whose life he had just saved. Armin Nazarian, the immigrant who had shared his meal with a hungry child, unaware that 20 years later, that same child would hold his failing heart in skilled hands. Mr. Nazarian, Michael said softly, though he knew the sedated man couldn't hear him. I think I owe you a meal. Armand drifted through layers of consciousness, aware first of pain, a deep, insistent ache in his chest, then of light filtering through half-closed eyelids. Voices murmured nearby, clinical and efficient. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled his nostrils, and somewhere a machine beeped in steady rhythm. Hospital? The word formed in his mind as fragments of memory assembled themselves. The crushing pain in his chest while prepping vegetables at the restaurant. The floor rushing up to meet him. Sirens wailing. He tried to speak, but his throat felt raw. Something foreign recently removed from it. Only a dry croak emerged. Mr. Nazarian? Can you hear me? A face came into focus above him. A young nurse with kind eyes above her mask. Water, Armin managed to whisper. Of course. She held a straw to his lips, and the cool liquid soothed his parched throat. You're in Boston General. You've had heart surgery. Dr. Wasser Sorworm. Chen will be by soon to explain everything. Armin nodded slightly, too exhausted to form questions. Surgery. That explained the pain, the feeling that his chest had been cracked open and sewn back together, which he supposed it had. He drifted in and out of consciousness over the next few hours as nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting medications. Time lost meaning in the fluorescent-lit room, where day and night blended indistinguishably. Later, perhaps the next day, perhaps the same one, a new presence entered his room. Armand opened his eyes to see a young doctor reviewing his chart. The man was perhaps in his early 30s, with an air of quiet competence. Monsieur Nazarian, the doctor said, looking up from the chart with a smile that seemed oddly personal. I'm Dr. Chen. I performed your bypass surgery 2 days ago. Thank you, Armand said, his voice still rough but stronger, for saving my life. Doctor. Chen approached the bed, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. How's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? 5, maybe 6. Armand had known worse pain in his life, though this one was uniquely invasive, as if his very core had been compromised. The doctor nodded, making a note in the chart. I'll have the nurse adjust your medication. You're recovering well considering the complexity of the procedure. You had what we call a widowmaker heart attack, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery. You're lucky you got to the hospital so quickly. My boss called ambulance, Armin explained. Good man, Mr. Demetrius. Very good man, Dr. Chen agreed. He seemed to hesitate, then asked, Mr. Nazarian, how long have you been in America? The question seemed odd outside the normal medical inquiries, but Armin answered anyway. 24 years now. Came in 2003. Dr. Fujanafurentano101. Chen nodded, his expression unreadable. And you've been working in restaurants all this time? Yes. Started dishwasher, now I am sous chef at Greek Place in Cambridge. Pride crept into Armin's voice despite his weakness. It had been a long journey from those first desperate months. Why, you ask? The doctor seemed to make a decision. He pulled the visitor's chair closer to the bed and sat down. An unusual action that suggested this wasn't a routine post-operative visit. Mr. Nazarian, do you remember a night many years ago when you shared your dinner with a hungry boy in a park? Armin stared at the doctor, confusion clouding his pain-filled eyes. What you talking about? Doctor? Eturinas Sema 1. Chen reached into his white coat pocket and withdrew a small red pocket knife, placing it carefully on the bedside table between them. This was in your belongings when you were admitted. It belonged to that boy once. Armand's gaze fixed on the pocket knife, recognition dawning slowly. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, turning it over to reveal the crude initials carved into the plastic. Michael? He whispered, looking up at the doctor with new understanding. You are Michael? The doctor, Michael, nodded, emotion tightening his features. I am. For a moment, neither spoke. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence as past and present aligned in the sterile hospital room. The baklava, Armin said finally, a hint of a smile touching his lips despite his pain. You liked it? Michael laughed softly, the professional distance of physician and patient momentarily bridged by the shared memory. It was the first time I'd ever tasted anything like it. I told my mother about it that night, tried to describe it. She found a Middle Eastern bakery the next weekend, but it wasn't the same. Never is, Armin agreed. My grandmother's recipe was best. A nurse appeared in the doorway with medication, interrupting their unexpected reunion. Michael stood, resuming his professional demeanor as he conferred with her briefly about Armin's pain management. When they were alone again, Armin clutched the pocket knife in his weathered hand. You kept this all these years? No. Michael shook his head. You kept it. I left it on the bench that night. You must have found it after I ran off. Ah, Armin nodded slowly, memories clarifying. Yes, I think I keep it, hoping to return, but never saw you again in park. My mother changed jobs soon after. We moved to a different neighborhood. Michael's voice softened, but I never forgot that night or your kindness. It was one of the reasons I became a doctor, to help people the way you helped me. Armin's eyes grew moist. I did nothing special, just shared food. It was special to me. Michael insisted. I was hungry and alone, and you treated me with dignity. You couldn't have known then how much that simple act would mean. A comfortable silence fell between them, the connection transcending the years that had passed and their vastly different lives. In that moment, they were simply two humans whose paths had crossed twice, once by chance and once by what some might call fate. Your parents must be proud, Armin said finally. Dr. Sun, something flickered across Michael's face, a shadow of old pain. My mother would have been. She passed away 10 years ago. Cancer. I am sorry, Armin said sincerely. She raised good men. She did her best. Michael checked his watch reluctantly. I have rounds to complete, but I'll come back tomorrow. Is there anything you need? Anyone I should contact for you? Armin shook his head. No family here. Just work friends. No wife? Children. Never married. A wistful expression crossed Armin's face. America was complicated. Always working, saving to bring family who never came. Then parents died. Siblings made their own lives. He shrugged slightly, then winced at the movement. Is okay. I have good life here. Michael nodded, though his expression suggested he heard the loneliness beneath Armin's words. Rest now. We'll talk more tomorrow. As he turned to leave, Armin called after him. Doctor, Michael, the knife. You should take back. Michael smiled, shaking his head. Keep it for now. We'll decide its fate when you're stronger. After the doctor left, Armin lay awake despite his exhaustion, the pocket knife clutched in his hand like a talisman. Of all the surgeons in Boston, that his life would be saved by the boy from the park seemed beyond coincidence. Perhaps, he thought as he drifted toward sleep, there was a pattern to life after all. Invisible threads connecting seemingly random acts of kindness across time. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael visited Armin daily, sometimes professionally during rounds, and increasingly during his lunch breaks or after his shift ended. What began as courtesy visits evolved into something more meaningful as they slowly bridged the decades that had separated them. Armin learned about Michael's journey, how he'd worked his way through college on scholarships, supported by his single mother who cleaned hotel rooms at night and took accounting classes during the day, how he'd earned a full scholarship to medical school, graduating at the top of his class despite working part-time, how he'd specialized in cardiothoracic surgery after his mother's death. Too late to save her, but determined to save others. In turn, Michael discovered Armin's story, the village in Armenia destroyed by conflict, the difficult journey to America with only a distant cousin's address in his pocket, the years of grinding poverty before he found stability, the dreams deferred and eventually abandoned, the quiet dignity with which he'd built a life far from his homeland. You never went back? Michael asked one evening, sharing takeout from an Armenian restaurant he'd found. A small surprise for Armin, who had progressed to solid foods. Armin shook his head, tasting the familiar flavors of his childhood with closed eyes. Too expensive at first. Then after years pass, what is left to go back to? My parents died. Villages changed. I became American without noticing. Michael understood more than Armin realized. Though born in America, he'd experienced the peculiar alienation of straddling cultures. His Chinese heritage preserved in his mother's apartment through language, food, and traditions. While outside those walls, he navigated an entirely different world. My mother was the same, Michael said. She planned to return to China someday, to show me where she came from. We saved for years. He poked at his food. The money ended up paying for her treatments instead. Armin reached across the small hospital table, his IV line stretching as he patted Michael's hand. The gesture, simple but profound, acknowledged their shared experience of deferred dreams and paths not taken. As Armand's recovery progressed, their conversations deepened. Michael brought books, translations of Armenian poetry he'd found, medical journals when Armin expressed curiosity about his condition, and novels they discussed during Michael's visits. For Armin, these visits became anchors in the disorienting hospital routine. For Michael, they offered something he hadn't realized he'd been missing, a connection that transcended his professional identity, that reminded him of the human stories behind each medical chart. One afternoon, as Armin completed his daily walk around the cardiac floor, his strength returning incrementally, he asked the question that had been forming for days. Why you become surgeon, Michael? Real reason. Michael, walking slowly beside him, considered the question carefully. I tell people it's because I was good at science, or because it offered security my family never had. He paused. But honestly, I wanted to repay debts that could never be repaid. To your mother, to her, to teachers who believed in me, to the social worker who found us emergency housing when we were evicted. Michael's voice softened. To a stranger who shared his dinner when I was hungry. Armin stopped walking, leaning slightly on his IV pole. You owe me nothing, Michael. Not a debt like money, Michael clarified. A debt of kindness. You showed me something important that night, that generosity doesn't depend on abundance. You had almost nothing, yet you shared it anyway. The simple truth of this observation brought unexpected tears to Armin's eyes. He had never considered his actions remarkable. In the village of his childhood, sharing food was as natural as breathing, not charity but community, the simple recognition of common humanity. In my country, Armin said, blinking away moisture, we have saying, break bread with stranger, find friend instead. Michael smiled. I like that. In Chinese culture, we believe that if someone saves your life, they become responsible for you forever. Then we are even, Armin declared. You saved my life with surgery. I save yours with kebab. They both laughed, the absurd equivalence nevertheless containing a kernel of truth. Lives could be saved in many ways, not all involving scalpels and sutures. As they completed their circuit of the floor, returning to Armin's room, Michael made a decision. You're being discharged tomorrow, he said. The cardiologist is pleased with your progress, and you'll continue recovery as an outpatient. Armin nodded, having anticipated this milestone. I call Mr. Dimitrios. He say I can use couch in his office until I climb stairs to my apartment. Actually, Michael said carefully, I have another suggestion. My house has a guest room on the ground floor. You'd have your privacy, but someone would be there if you needed help. At least until you're cleared to return to your apartment. Armin stopped at the threshold of his hospital room, surprise evident on his face. You invite me to your home? Why? Michael considered several answers. Professional concern for a high-risk patient, practical solutions to Armin's living situation, but settled on the simplest truth. Because 20 years ago, you didn't just share your food with me. You shared your humanity when I needed it most. He met Armin's gaze directly. Let me return that kindness now. In the silence that followed, decades of solitude and self-reliance warred with Armin's growing affection for this young doctor who had once been a hungry boy in a park. Pride urged refusal, wisdom counseled acceptance. If I say yes, Armin finally answered, I cook for you when I am stronger. Armenian food, not hospital garbage. Michael grinned. Deal. As Michael's home surprised Armin, he had expected something grand. A surgeon's mansion with imposing columns and manicured gardens. Instead, he found himself in a modest craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. Its warmth evident in worn leather furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and framed photographs covering the walls. My fiancée is at a conference in Chicago, Michael explained as he helped Armin settle into the guest room. She'll be back next week. Sophia's a pediatric oncologist, children's cancer specialist. 2 doctors, Armin observed. Very smart family. Smart enough to know when to order takeout instead of poisoning ourselves with our cooking, Michael joked, arranging Armin's medications on the bedside table. Speaking of which, I should warn you, I can barely boil water. Sophia's the cook between us. Armin patted his arm reassuringly. When stitches heal more, I teach you. Every man should know basic food. The first few days established a routine. Michael left early for the hospital but returned for lunch when his schedule allowed. A home health nurse visited daily to check Armin's incision and vital signs. In the evenings, they shared simple meals and conversation, their unlikely friendship deepening through shared stories and discovered commonalities. Despite the decades between them and their vastly different backgrounds, they found connection in unexpected places. A mutual love for chess, which they played with fierce concentration, similar tastes in classical music, and a shared appreciation for well-crafted tools, from kitchen knives to surgical instruments. 1 week into his stay, Armin was strong enough to prepare a simple Armenian dinner, a vegetable and herb stew with rice that filled the house with aromas of his childhood. Michael arrived home to find the kitchen transformed, Armin moving with careful but purposeful movements between cutting board and stove. Should you be doing this much? Michael asked, concern evident in his voice as he set down his briefcase. Armin waved away his worry with a wooden spoon. Dr. Chen is too protective. Chef Nazarian knows his limits. The meal was a revelation. Complex flavors that spoke of a culinary tradition preserved through displacement and adaptation. As they ate, Michael found himself asking questions about Armenian culture, history, and cuisine, subjects he realized he knew almost nothing about despite his extensive education. Armin answered each question thoughtfully, his pride in his heritage evident. For the first time since his surgery, he seemed fully animated, his hands gesturing expressively as he described wedding traditions or the proper way to prepare dolma. In Armenia, food is never just food, he explained. It's connection to past, to family. Every dish has story. Like medicine, Michael observed, every procedure has a history, people who developed it, refined it, taught it to others. Armin nodded, pleased by the parallel. Yes, exactly same. Both healing arts, yes. Food for body, surgery for broken parts. As they cleared the dishes together, Michael insisting on handling the heavier items, a photograph on the refrigerator caught Armin's attention. It showed a much younger Michael beside a small, determined-looking woman with the same serious eyes. Your mother? Armin asked softly. Michael nodded, pausing with plates in hand. Her name was Lynn. That was taken when I got my college acceptance letter. She has proud face, Armin observed. Strong woman. The strongest I've ever known. Michael set the dishes in the sink, his movements suddenly less certain. She worked herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities she never had. When she got sick, she hid it for months because she didn't want to worry me during my residency. The familiar weight of loss settled between them. That universal grief that needs no explanation between those who have experienced it. My mother's similar, Armin said after a moment. Last letter I received, she write only good news. Later, my sister tell me she dictate letter from hospital bed, already very sick. They finished cleaning in companionable silence, each respecting the other's memories. Later, as they sat in the living room with tea, Armin broached a subject he'd been considering since arriving. Michael, I think soon I should return to my apartment. You and Sophia need privacy when she returns. There's no rush, Michael insisted. Your follow-up with the cardiologist isn't for another week, and the stairs to your third-floor walk-up are still too challenging. Perhaps, Armin acknowledged, but I cannot impose forever. It's not an imposition, Michael said firmly. You're family now. The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Family. Something neither man had much of anymore. Something both had lost and longed for in their different ways. Family, Armin repeated softly, testing the word like an unfamiliar spice. This is big word, Michael. I know. Michael set down his teacup. When I was 10, you treated me with kindness when you had no obligation to do so. Now I find myself in a position to help you, and it feels right, like completing a circle that was started long ago. Armin studied the younger man's face, seeing both the accomplished surgeon and the hungry boy he had once been. Circles are good. In my culture, we believe life moves in cycles, always returning to important truths. Then stay, Michael said simply, at least until you're stronger. Let this be one of those cycles. Armin nodded slowly, acceptance in his eyes. For now, I stay, but when Sophia comes, we discuss again. Sophia Chen Williams arrived home on a rainy Tuesday evening, her dark hair damp from the dash from taxi to front door. Michael had warned her about their house guest, but nothing had prepared her for the immediate warmth with which Armin greeted her, nor for the transformation in her fiancé. Michael seemed lighter somehow, his perpetual intensity softened around the edges. She watched with amused curiosity as the two men moved around each other in the kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of old friends, preparing tea and setting out the dinner that Armin had insisted on cooking, despite her protests that she was too tired to eat. Nonsense, the older man had declared. Travel needs warm food as welcome, not cold sandwich. Later, after Michael had helped Armin to bed, his energy still limited by his recovery, Sophia curled beside her fiancé on the couch, her head on his shoulder. He's wonderful, she said softly. When you told me about finding your childhood meal-sharing stranger on your operating table, I thought it was an amazing coincidence. But now I see it's more than that. Michael's arm tightened around her. What do you mean? I mean, he's changed you. She traced a finger along his jaw. You seem more present, less consumed by the hospital. When was the last time you checked your email tonight? Michael realized with surprise that he hadn't reached for his phone once since arriving home. Normally, he remained tethered to the hospital mentally long after physically leaving it, constantly checking updates on patients or reviewing case files. You're right, he admitted. Having Armin here has forced me to be more present when I'm home. He asks real questions and expects real answers, not just polite small talk. It's good for you, Sophia said. For both of us, actually. The house feels more alive with him here. About that, Michael began carefully. I told him he could stay until he's fully recovered. His apartment has too many stairs and he lives alone. I hope that's okay with you since we never discussed it. Sophia sat up, regarding him with surprise. Of course it's okay. Did you think I'd object? Not object exactly, but we've barely had time together with our schedules, and now our home isn't just ours anymore. She smiled, taking his hand. Michael, since when have we ever been conventional? Our relationship has survived residency hours, emergency surgeries, and that disastrous vacation where you got called back for a transplant case. I think we can handle having a fascinating Armenian sous chef with us for a while. Relief washed over him. I should have known you'd understand. Besides, she added, I've never seen you form a connection like this with anyone outside of medicine. It's like he's the grandfather you never had. The observation struck Michael with its simple truth. His own grandparents had remained in China, existing only as voices on occasional phone calls and faces in faded photographs. Armin did fill a space in his life he hadn't recognized was empty, offering wisdom, stories, and a perspective that extended beyond the high-pressure world of surgery. Over the following weeks, Armin became integrated into their household in ways none of them had anticipated. When Michael and Sophia both worked late, they would return to find Armin teaching their cleaning lady's teenage son how to play chess or sharing recipes with their elderly neighbor. When Sophia's parents visited from San Francisco, Armin charmed them with stories and insisted on preparing a multicultural feast combining Armenian, Chinese, and American dishes. His physical recovery progressed steadily. The angry red line down his sternum faded to pink, then to a thin white scar. His strength returned incrementally, each day bringing more endurance. Michael monitored his progress with professional attention, adjusting medications and scheduling follow-up appointments, while Sophia contributed her own medical expertise when cardiac issues intersected with her knowledge of general medicine. One evening, as summer warmth finally replaced spring chill, they sat together on the back porch. Armin had planted an herb garden in raised beds that Michael had built under his instruction, basil, parsley, mint, and dill already sprouting in neat rows. When I was boy in village, Armin explained, pinching a mint leaf and releasing its fragrance, my grandmother could heal many things with plants, not like real doctors. He added hastily, but small problems, stomach pain, headache, skin rash. Traditional medicine often has validity, Sophia acknowledged. Many of our modern drugs began as plant compounds. In America, everything's separate, Armin observed. Food separate from medicine, medicine separate from spirit. In old country, all connected. Michael considered this as he sipped his tea. His medical training had emphasized evidence, procedure, and measurable outcomes. Yet his own experience with Armin had taught him that healing involved elements that couldn't be quantified in charts or monitored with machines. I've been thinking, Michael said suddenly, the cardiac wing is planning a patient outreach program, educational seminars, cooking classes for heart-healthy meals, support groups. They need someone who understands both food and heart health to help develop the culinary component. Armin looked up from his herb inspection. You think I could help with this? I think you'd be perfect, Michael confirmed. It's part-time, flexible hours, and they'd pay you as a consultant. You mentioned that you're not sure about returning to restaurant work with its long hours and physical demands. Hope and uncertainty mingled in Armin's expression. But my English is perfectly adequate, Sophia finished for him. Besides, your cooking speaks a universal language. The idea took root and blossomed over subsequent conversations. By the time Armand was cleared to return to normal activities, 3 months after his surgery, he had already met with the hospital's community outreach coordinator and begun developing a curriculum for cardiac patients, learning to adapt their traditional cultural cuisines to heart-healthy requirements. The day Armin moved back to his apartment was bittersweet. The guest room seemed emptier than it had before his arrival, the house quieter without his humming in the kitchen or his excited calls to come see a new sprout in the herb garden. You visit often, Armin instructed as Michael helped carry his few belongings up the narrow stairs to his third-floor apartment. Both of you, I test new recipes on you before I teach classes. We'll be your guinea pigs anytime, Michael promised. And you'll come for dinner every Sunday, non-negotiable. Standing in Armin's modest apartment, surrounded by the few possessions he had accumulated over 2 decades in America, Michael felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. This man who had once been a stranger in a park had become essential to his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Michael, Armand said, noting his emotion, this is not goodbye. It's just new chapter. I know, Michael nodded. It's just, when I was operating on you, I had no idea where it would lead. That you would become, he struggled to find the right word. Family, Armin supplied simply. Circle complete, yes. Yes, Michael agreed, embracing the older man carefully, mindful of his still healing chest. Circle complete. 1 year later, Armin stood nervously in the private dining room of Boston's most acclaimed Armenian restaurant, straightening the new tie Sophia had helped him select. Around him, tables decorated with white linens and spring flowers awaited the guests who would soon arrive. "Stop fidgeting," Michael admonished gently, adjusting his own tie in the reflection of a decorative mirror. "Everything looks perfect." "Not everything," Armin muttered, tugging at his collar. "This tie tries to strangle me." Sophia entered, resplendent in a deep blue dress that complemented her olive complexion. "The first guests are arriving. Are you two ready?" Before either could answer, the restaurant owner appeared at the door, gesturing excitedly. "Dr. Monanon, sure you unsure we were sure Shen. The film crew is here. They want to set up before everyone arrives." Michael nodded. "Show them in, Mr. Sarian." Armand's heart beat faster as a small documentary crew entered, led by a young woman with a tablet who introduced herself as the producer from the medical channel that was featuring their program in a special on innovative community health initiatives. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Nazarian," she greeted them professionally. "We'll be filming unobtrusively during the event, and then we'd like to do sit-down interviews with both of you afterward about the heart-healthy cultural cuisine program." The past year had transformed Armin's tentative consultant position into something remarkable. What began as simple cooking demonstrations had evolved into a comprehensive program spanning multiple cultural traditions, with Armand as its heart and soul. Patients from diverse backgrounds, Armenian, Greek, Italian, Chinese, Mexican, and more, learned to adapt their traditional recipes to support cardiac health without sacrificing cultural identity or flavor. The program's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Compliance with dietary recommendations among cardiac patients increased dramatically when cultural preferences were honored rather than replaced with generic health food. Blood pressure readings improved. Readmission rates decreased. Medical journals had published papers co-authored by Michael and the nutritional team, with Armand acknowledged as a key contributor despite his lack of formal credentials. Tonight marked the first anniversary of the program and its official expansion to 3 additional hospitals in the Boston area. As guests began filling the room, medical staff, former patients, hospital administrators, and community partners, Armin felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had experienced in his 25 years in America. For most of that time, he had existed on the margins. The immigrant dishwasher, the foreign cook, the accent that some customers mocked and others strained to understand. Now doctors sought his expertise. Nutritionists incorporated his techniques into their recommendations. Patients shared stories of how his teachings had helped them reconnect with their cultural heritage while healing their bodies. Michael clinked a glass for attention as the room filled, waiting until the murmurs subsided before speaking. "Thank you all for coming tonight." 1 year ago, Boston General launched what many considered an experimental approach to cardiac rehabilitation. Today, we celebrate not just its success, but its expansion. He gestured toward Armin. None of this would have been possible without the knowledge, skill, and heart of Armin Nazarian. Applause filled the room, causing Armin to blush deeply. Public recognition remained uncomfortable for him, though he had gradually grown accustomed to it as the program gained attention. "Many of you know the remarkable coincidence that brought Armin and me together," Michael continued, "how I performed emergency bypass surgery on him, only to discover he was the same man who had shared his dinner with me when I was a hungry child." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the audience. The story had become something of a legend at the hospital. What you may not know is how that simple act of kindness created ripples that continue to expand. Because Armin showed compassion to a stranger, lives are being transformed through this program. Former patients here tonight can attest to that. Several people nodded emphatically, including an elderly Greek woman who had been among Armin's first students and now volunteered as a program mentor for new patients. "There's a saying that when you save one life, you save an entire world," Michael said, his voice softening. "Armin saved my world twice, once with a shared meal that reminded a lonely child that kindness exists, and again by showing us all that healing is about more than procedures and prescriptions. It's about honoring who people are, where they come from, and what gives their lives meaning." Emotion threatened to overwhelm Armin as he listened. His journey from that park bench to this moment seemed impossible. A story someone else might tell, not his own life. Yet here he stood, surrounded by people who valued him not despite his background, but because of it. When Michael finished speaking, he surprised Armin by presenting him with a bound cookbook, the first publication of recipes and techniques from the program, with Armin's name prominently displayed as author. The hospital would distribute it to cardiac patients nationwide. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Armin found a quiet moment with Michael near the restaurant's small garden. "I never think, when I come to America, that I make difference," Armand admitted. "I think only survival, sending money home, maybe someday opening small restaurant. Instead, you've helped create a program that's changing how hospitals approach cultural competence in cardiac care," Michael said. "The medical director told me 3 other major hospital systems have requested our materials." Armin shook his head in wonder. "From dishwasher to this. America's strange country." "It's not the country," Michael corrected gently. "It's you, Armin. Your generosity, your knowledge, your willingness to share both." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched guests mingling in the warm evening air. Sophia had joined a group of cardiac nurses, laughing at something the nutrition director had said. The documentary crew filmed former patients demonstrating modified dance moves from their various cultural traditions, a joyful expression of healing that transcended language. You know, Armin said finally, "In old country we believe that acts of kindness never die. They live in hearts of those who receive them, then pass to others, on and on." Michael nodded, watching the diverse gathering, a microcosm of humanity united by food, health, and shared purpose. "I believe that too. So perhaps," Armin continued, his voice thoughtful, "when I share food with hungry boy in park, I am not just feeding one child. I am starting something that continues after me. Long after both of us." Michael agreed. "That's what legacy really means." As they rejoined the celebration, Armin carried this thought like a treasured heirloom. His life had not followed the path he had imagined when he first arrived in America with broken English and borrowed money. Instead, it had taken an entirely unexpected turn, one that began with a simple shared meal and led to a legacy of healing that would outlive him. An immigrant had shared his meal with a hungry child, unaware the boy would grow up to be his surgeon. Neither could have imagined where that moment of connection would lead, to lives intertwined by fate and choice, to healing that extended beyond the physical, to a circle of kindness expanding outward in endless ripples of possibility.